Hi, everybody, and thank you very much for tuning into our podcast today. Today, I have a special guest, and I am so excited that she's here. Number one, that I could pull her away from her very busy daily tasks to come over and visit with me about the title business. So today we have Maria Oakham. She is one of the two owners of Tradition Title Company. And we were just talking before the podcast that Tradition Title has been in business in 2025 will be 16 years. So that is a long time, and congratulations.
Thank you, Amy.
So that is 3 offices in 16 years. So let's see, one office and where you started, fair enough to say, was in the Memorial area.
Yes.
And then the second office was?
Katy with
West. And then the last office that you just opened?
Washington Avenue. And that's been open since 2014.
Wow. And that's a beautiful office.
Thank you.
So you just remodeled it. And when I walk in there, I feel like I'm in just pure luxury. So it's beautiful. So I always tell people, especially my agents, when they get into the business, pick a title company or 2 or 3 that you're very, very comfortable with, because they are a huge part of the transaction. And not only do the agents have to be comfortable with the title company and the escrow officer or closer, which is what you do, but the buyer and seller have to be comfortable with them too, because there's a lot of interaction that you and your team have with all of us, the agent, the buyer's agent, the seller's agent, the buyer, and the seller. So tell us a little bit about what a title company does, because a lot of times people, when they relocate to Houston, don't use title companies, or they don't use them in the same capacity that we use them. So tell us a little bit about, in Texas, what a title company really does.
So in the state of Texas, my industry is actually regulated. So title insurance in Texas is regulated. In other states, it's not. In some states, you have attorneys. In our state, you have escrow officers, although we have a whole backing of attorneys that help us along the way. Title companies do a multitude of things, not just facilitating the closing, which is, I think, what most people think we do. Amy.
That's what they see, right?
That's what they see. But on the back side, you are entrusting us to make sure that from point A to point B, your file gets closed in a correct manner. So what you'll find throughout the title company is we take everything from the earnest money in a contract to receiving that in, to having conversations with your clients or with the other side's clients about anything from title issues, which we are trying to clear up prior to closing, to facilitating, maybe somebody lives in a different state. You all deal with a lot of relocation, so it may be timing to make sure documents. But at the end of the day, what we hope to be providing is excellent service, because I believe that when I first got in the business, I had an agent say to me, if I choose you, I expect you to make me look good. And so we strive to hopefully provide wonderful service and make people feel at home when they walk into our office. I think that's the most important feeling.
And it's amazing what people really, I don't think they realize everything that you do in the transaction. So as far as benefits go, because sometimes a seller will look at the cost of a title policy and go, oh my God, what am I paying for? Well, what are the benefits to a seller to have a title company close the transaction? What would be those benefits?
Well, first of all, we're facilitating their paperwork, payoffs. If you have a seller who has a loan that needs to be paid off, we're going to be paying off that loan. We're making sure taxes are paid. We're making sure that money is being allocated correctly via the contract. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things we're doing is following the terms of the contract. So your title company has to read the contract, understand the contract. Like realtors, we have continuing education. So it doesn't just have to do with my industry. A lot of it has to do with your industry. Understanding the mechanics of what we're using. So a title company uses three things to facilitate a closing, which is the contract, our title commitment, and if there's a lender involved, lender's closing instructions.
So you have to work with the lender as well.
Yes.
So, and then as far as the before I talk about that, and then what are the benefits to a buyer to use a title company? Which I think the benefits to the buyer are huge.
Outweigh,
Yes.
of course. So right now we're at that time of year where taxes are coming out, and it's always a dicey time of year, as you know. So right now we are updating our files to collect and pay taxes. Part of your title policy that gets issued is guaranteeing taxes, and that's probably, you and I've had many a discussion
Yes.
on taxes on files.
It's my favorite
I know
subject.
it is. And just making sure taxes are a huge thing. Homeowners associations, big problem, right? We want to make sure HOA dues are paid, they're prorated, transfer fees, all those wonderful fees that get locked in. We're looking at that. Walking buyers through just a myriad of things. My office, I deal with a lot of first-time home buyers, as you know, and so walking them through the process, making sure that they're filing for their homestead exemption. I know that's something that you all do on your end, but I feel like if you're not used to having a home or you've never filed for a homestead exemption, you need to know those rules.
And so, for a buyer, can you imagine if they didn't use a title company, and let's just say it was somebody buying new construction,
Right.
Right. So the title policy does what? It guarantees what for the buyer?
For the buyer, so we would issue them an owner's title policy. Most importantly, it's guaranteeing taxes. If you have a builder that hasn't paid taxes, we're collecting and paying taxes, back taxes. It's also ensuring that they are free and clear of any liens or encumbrances that aren't on that title commitment. So anything with regards to deed restrictions and those are exceptions, but we're talking about mechanics liens. Let's say we have a builder that didn't pay a bill. We're going to get a payoff. We're going to ensure title that those things are taken care of.
Which is a huge comfort. I know for me, I had a transaction this year that I had some grave concerns about the fact that my buyer may get some bills after the closing.
Right.
So my buyer could walk out of that closing and know that it didn't matter if there were any bills, that they could report that to the title company.
Absolutely, they would file a claim. If between the time we closed and that deed was filed, if mechanics liens were filed against that property, that is something we would be addressing.
And that's a huge benefit, and that is really the buyer should be able to put their head on the pillow at night and know that
Right.
the taxes are all paid and there are no liens that they're going to be stuck with later. And
The sellers had to pay. If the seller has a payoff, the seller's payoff has been taken care of. If there's an IRS lien from the seller, that's being addressed. Anything on that title commitment that is discussed on that commitment is a requirement that any title company has to cure or satisfy prior to closing.
So the other thing is, I think you're the watchdog. So let's just say that we have one of my associates has a transaction right now where the house is owned by somebody whose husband had passed, right?
Yes.
And that person that passed without a will. And so now we have a concern about the heirs of that side of the transaction, because the property is owned by a husband and wife, and it's community property. So tell us a little bit about that and what we had to do, or what we're in the process of doing right now to overcome that.
You know, we could probably talk 4 or 5 podcasts about people that don't have wills and how it affects real property in the state of Texas. And so get a will. Well, that's the first thing I'll say.
Yes.
A small will. Just
And make sure somebody has a copy of it.
Absolutely.
Because this poor woman is hunting around wondering where
Right.
that will is.
And this was a second marriage for her,
Yes,
correct?
yes.
So, you know, that's a whole nother line of things you have to take care of. But in Texas, we're a community property state. So they used to say it takes 1 to buy, 2 to sell.
I always say that.
And, you know, for instance,
Say that again. Say it slowly, because it's important.
1 to buy, 2 to sell.
Meaning that somebody, if they buy it and then they live in it with their spouse, and it's community property, it takes both parties to sign off on it.
Right.
And okay.
Exactly, on the deed. And what you'll find, especially when you're dealing with anybody that's never been married, let's say you have a person that buys a home, they're single, they get married, they move into that home, all of a sudden that's considered community property. All of a sudden that seller, now his or her spouse, has to sign documents because they have lived in that property. It's also a homestead issue because in the state of Texas we have homestead. So whatever your primary residence is and you both lived in it, you're both going to be signing off on that.
So much, and I will say that even the transaction I'm talking to you about is one where you're not even the one closing it, and who did I call to answer my questions? You. So you are my total go-to for everything title. And I have so much admiration and respect for your knowledge in the business. So even though you have only had traditional, not only, I say only because we're approaching our 40th year, so I think everything under 40 is only, but 16 years is a very, very long time, and certainly you don't stay in business 16 years if you don't give great service and do a great job. Tell me what you did before that. What did you do before you opened Tradition Title?
I worked for another underwriter. I worked for two underwriters and doing the same thing. Marketing and sales, exactly the same thing. Closing, I went back into closing by default.
Well, I love you that you're in closing, because to me there's no one that can close a transaction like you. And you give everybody you give everybody such a comfort that when they get an answer from you, it is the answer. It's not a guess. You briefly touched on a minute ago the deed. And so again, that's everything pertaining to the title company to close the transaction, and that involves the deed. So tell us how that works.
So what actually transfers or vests title from one person to the other is the warranty deed. And that is signed by the seller. Sometimes it's signed by both the buyer and the seller. Once in a while, I have a lender that wants both parties to sign.
Yeah, I know when I bought my condo, I wanted everybody to sign
off on it.
But
right?
I'm a little bit anal.
Well, and I don't think that's such a bad thing.
Yeah,
I mean, it's not such a bad thing for you as a buyer to sign off on the deed saying, yes, I accept this vesting instrument. I mean, it's going into your name. You know, in this day and age with all the technology we have, I feel like the mistakes that may have been made 20 years ago where names were misspelled or maybe a legal description was wrong.
Yes.
I think those are far and few between. But I do believe a good title company is reviewing deeds. They're reviewing paperwork to make sure everything is correct.
Yes.
We have a lot more options in this day and age where we can do correction affidavits if something's wrong, a name's misspelled, which happens once in a while. Or a legal description may have forgotten a plat or some reference in the whole body of the legal description. But as a whole, the deed that is the big one. That's the big enchilada. That is the thing that everybody recognizes. That's what gets filed at the courthouse. And that's what lets everybody know that you now own that property.
And so if there's a loan, the lender will prepare the note, and then you go and prepare the deed?
So the lender prepares the note and their security instrument, the deed of trust. And in the state of Texas, which is always interesting to out-of-state lenders, they don't always understand this, in the body of that warranty deed is what's called a vendor's lien, where in the state of Texas, a lender wants that loan amount retained in that deed that the seller is giving over to the buyer, and it just says the loan amount. You know, in the state of Texas, we never disclose sales price in our deeds. Other states do. And it always says for $10 in consideration.
Right.
I absolutely have no idea where that verbiage comes from. But
everybody questions that.
As long as I've done this, and every deed states that. But also in there, it would say XYZ lender has lent this amount of dollars, and they secure their vendor's lien in that deed. You understand all this, but I do get agents periodically that will look at a title commitment and they'll say, oh my gosh, there's a vendor's lien out there. And once I tell them, they're like, oh, I've seen that. I've seen that in a deed before.
Yes.
That's just one more added layer that the lender has in securing that property.
I mean, and the reality is you do so much behind the scenes that people don't really realize that you do. Sometimes I'm in awe when you walk into a closing room and I see this mound of paperwork, and I think, there are little elves behind those doors that put together all that. But I know you're very involved in it too, but I also know you have a fantastic team.
I do.
That walks in and brings you your stack. That's great. And the other thing I think that is really something I truly appreciate is sometimes I'll get home at night and I'll pull a title commitment, or I'll pull something, or I'll have a question, and I don't have to wait until 8:30 the next morning to call you. Maybe some people think they do, but I just pick up the phone and call you.
Yeah.
And I know if you don't answer, it's because you're busy, and that you will call me back, and that is a huge thing.
Oh, thank you. Well, the problem is I'm in an industry, Amy, that most people don't understand. I mean, I think a lot of people just really, they walk in thinking, oh, they just signed me up. They don't understand what we're doing on the back side. And I feel like it's our job, at least it's my company's job, to make everybody feel at home when they come in. It should be a joyful time. You and I've had this conversation so many
Yes.
times. By the time they get
There
to
should
me,
be champagne at the
it
end.
should. I wish there was always. I think it should be joyful, and I think everybody should be excited. And I definitely feel that a lot of people in my industry have lost that passion to make everybody just feel so special, because especially buyers and sellers.
It's
I
a
mean,
big
this is
deal.
a big deal.
Yes.
And we forget what a big deal it is as we're going huffing and puffing. So I really try to walk in and just put everything aside and walk in and just understand this is the most important transaction. I mean, how many transactions do people have in their life, Amy?
Oh, yeah.
4?
Yeah, exactly.
4 houses? I mean, what's the average? You
Exactly.
probably know better than I
say
do.
what we do every day is rote, and what they do in buying and selling is so foreign to them, and that's why they need us.
Right.
So we have to make sure they totally understand. I think we'll take a little pause, and we'll come back, because there's no way. Most of my podcasts are at most 30 minutes at most, and even less than that. But this particular subject is one that is near and dear to so many people, because how many times have we had people call us, Maria, and say, well, I'm signing off on the deed, and I'm signing off on all these documents, and if the buyer doesn't come in tomorrow, how do I know I'm not giving my house away? There's a lot of fear involved in a transaction.
Especially now,
Yes,
right?
yes. So I want to talk about, on part 2 of this podcast, is I want to talk about the closing statement. I want to talk about some of the fraud that we're experiencing, and then the title commitment and the title policy.
Perfect.
Okay?
I'm in.
Stay tuned for more information from wonderful, wonderful Maria Oakham and all the knowledge she has to share about the title business. You won't want to miss part 2. And remember, your home is our expertise.